Hey guys, some of you might have seen a video we released recently talking about the migration topic in Japan. Recently migration has been in the news a bit and a lot of discussion going on about migration. As I predicted at the end of that video, it wouldn't be long until we addressed it again, because once these things start rolling, they really start rolling, don't they? So sure enough, this week we saw quite a lot more discussion about immigration and lots of different opinions from both sides of the fence, including on our video, by the way. Lots of different opinions on our video, people with all sorts of solutions and all sorts of ideas. So a couple of things that really stood out this week. One of them was there was a report that one school had some Muslim students attending had decided to offer those students some halal food for lunch. So those of you unaware, usually Japanese schools have provide lunch for the students, and so the principal of that school said that he wanted to offer those kids food that they could eat. So he got some halal options for those kids to eat for lunch. And apparently, I mean, this is all the report, right? Apparently that resulted in about 1,000 complaints to the school from various parents and citizens complaining that if kids attend a Japanese school, they should eat the same as everybody else. So that led to all sorts of discussion in the press and in social media, of course. So there's that. And then the other one that stood out this week too was there was some suggestion from some politicians, because what's happening now, there's a bit of a competition amongst the politicians now to see who can sound the most hard line against foreigners and non-Japanese people. So one of them suggested this week that foreigners who have permanent residency should be stripped of their permanent residency if they purposefully don't pay their tax or their social obligations, which would be the pension. We're supposed to pay the pension, our pension payments every month or every year, and our health insurance. And it is sort of well known that a lot of foreign people in Japan neglect to pay their health insurance and their pension. So this politician was suggesting that anybody who intentionally doesn't pay their tax or pay their health insurance or pay their pension should have their permanent residency stripped from them. So again, lots of arguments on both sides of that argument as to the right and wrong of that. So yeah, it's snowballing. These discussions are snowballing, as they do. Once you start talking about stuff like this, it starts to snowball. So it's hard to know how much of it is reacting to people's concerns that they had already, and how much of these discussions is actually creating concerns that weren't there before. I suspect it's a bit of a vicious circle. The more they talk about it, the more concern it generates. It's like, you know, it's a famous thing over the years. Politicians in all countries often use crime as a bit of a political tool, and they'll beef up or increase the concern about crime and talk about how people are more concerned about crime, even if actual crime statistics have gone down. And it's a little bit like that. You would think that the more they talk about this and the more concerns that they talk about, then the more concerns there'll be. It's sort of a vicious circle. One of our patrons asked me what I thought about all this. It doesn't really matter what I think about all this. My attitude's always been, with just about everything, that anything I can do something about. There's two words in Japanese that are really helpful in situations like this. One of them is gambare, which means do your best, and the other one is shogunai, which means it can't be helped. And I think those two particular phrases, and particularly they have a lot of strength in Japanese thinking, those two words, much stronger than the English translation. And I think those two things we can apply to everything. Is it something I can do something about? Now, as a permanent resident, I'm an Australian citizen with Japanese residency, permanent residency, so that means I can't vote, so I can't influence any of these political discussions from that point of view. So I can't do anything about that, so that's shogunai. And then what can I actually do? So my thinking is that I can only affect my immediate circle. So my thinking is that my behaviour in my day-to-day life, by my behaviour I can affect what happens around me and how the Japanese people in my life react to me. And I mean, that's one of the reasons that a lot of the videos are on our channel. It's the How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist was made with that in mind, and the book that we did called How to Do Stuff in Japan was made with that in mind. And that's for those people who have similar thinking, that when they're in Japan, or if they're in Japan, they want to behave in a way that's not going to cause any waves or any ripples. I mean, there are a lot of people, and we talked about this before, there are a lot of people that leave comments on our how-to videos saying, I'm not going to do any of that, I'm not Japanese, I'm going to do things my way. And we come across people like that all the time. In fact, this week, I was at a place this week that's not really a tourist place, but they do get some tourists because they have a couple of places there that are of interest, but you don't see a lot of foreigners there. So, I was actually making a video of the ramen machine, the ramen vending machine, and as I was filming that video, some of you would have seen that video, as I was filming that, I heard these loud voices coming down the street behind me, speaking English, really loud voices. There was a guy and a girl, and the girl was wearing a really little pair of shorts and a really little top with a rather generous cleavage hanging out, and she was heavily tattooed on her legs and on her arms, and she was skipping down the street and talking really loudly to this dude that she was with, and turning heads. There were people turning to see what this noise was, and here's this scene of this girl hanging out all over the place, skin hanging out all over the place, heavily tattooed skin, heavily hanging out all over the place, skipping down the street. Now, you know, just to clarify, one of my longest buddies that's been a buddy since kindergarten, who I love dearly, is heavily tattooed. He's absolutely heavily tattooed. He's sleeved, he's heavily tattooed, and I love the guy, you know, and I'm cool about his art, and it's all wonderful, you know. But when he came to visit us, I said to him, oh man, the tats are a bit of a thing here, you know. And he went, right, no, say no more, he said. And he turned up here with a long sleeve shirt. And with the exception of a couple of times at home where he peeled off his shirt to show my kids and spin my kids out, whenever we went anywhere, he made a point of sort of covering the tats up just to not cause any ripples, you know, which was really decent of him, you know. But watching this girl skipping really loudly, talking to this guy, and sort of, and it was nice to see she was having a good time. She was having a great time, but it was just, talk about causing ripples. I mean, there's people turning around all over the place. Sort of, you can see Japanese people are pretty good about not usually saying things to each other about other people. That they tend not to be critical of other people openly, but they don't have to be. What you see is they'll look at something or somebody and then look at each other, and even if they don't say anything, you can see the reaction to what they're saying. So my point is, there's some things we can't do anything about here. But as I've been saying for 15 years or however long we've been making these videos, you know, if we're going to be a guest here, and I mean, I include myself in that too. I'm not a Japanese citizen, so even though I've got permanent residency, I'm still a guest. And even if you don't want to see yourself as a guest, even if you just want to see yourself as part of a society, you know, we really should be behaving in a way that doesn't make ripples. Because a lot of these guys haven't experienced, I've had people tell me here lots of times that I'm the first foreigner they've ever spoken to. I've been told that lots of times here. I've been told that by one really old guy, said that to me once. And some young people have said it to me, that I'm the first foreigner they've spoken to face to face. That they see foreigners on TV and, all that sort of stuff, and on the internet and so on. But the first foreigner they've actually sat and spoke to face to face. And so we have an influence on how they're seen, And I think a lot of the bigotry that we see around the world and in Japan is often by people who haven't actually experienced the people that they're bigoted against, right? Or they've had negative experiences of the people that they're bigoted against, and I think that we can have an influence, And I've seen it here before where, I did Kyudo years ago. I was doing Kyudo, which is a Japanese archery martial arts, very traditional. And when I first went there was this bunch of old guys, the old teachers, sitting around a table. And one of the teachers said, I think we should let this guy, join our dojo. And one of the other old guys shook his head and turned to the guy next to him and said, I don't think it's a good idea. And a couple of years later, that teacher was actually at my wedding and got up and made a really sweet speech, right? Which really touched me, because I remembered he was the one that said to this other teacher that he didn't think it was a good idea to let the foreigner join the dojo, right? And then here we are 2 years later, and he's at my wedding making the most touching speech. It was really sweet. He actually spoke a bit of English as well. He got up and said, I'm sorry for my broken English, and then actually made a speech in English, which I'd never heard him speak English before. He'd actually spent a lot of time preparing for it and made a really sweet speech. So my point is that it seems that over that 2 years that I'd been training in that dojo, that I'd turned that guy's thinking around. He went from thinking that he didn't really want a foreigner in the dojo to accepting that this foreigner wasn't so bad after all, And I think we can have that effect in the people in our immediate vicinity, talking loudly on the train. That was the other one. I saw another one this week that someone had posted, because the clickbaiters are right onto this topic at the moment. Anything that's controversial that might stir up some negative feeling from anybody seems to be getting posted on the internet this week. And someone posted a picture, possibly AI, of two foreigners sort of dancing and singing on a train while all the Japanese people were sitting there quietly staring at their phones. And it's possibly AI, and it was possibly just clickbait, but it is a true example. I mean, I've actually showed one of the earliest videos I made was of a bunch of foreigners with backpacks on a train, and one of them was talking loudly on a phone, and which is a big no-no here. And sort of behaviours like that, bad behaviours like that can have a negative ripple effect, whereas good behaviour can have a positive ripple effect. And again, I know there's people who are watching this video who are saying, I'm not Japanese, I don't care what people think. A lot of the people that come here for a holiday don't care what effect they have while they're here. A lot of people that come here maybe for 6 months or a year or something like that, they don't care either. And I've seen that over the years as well, that they'll come here, they'll work for some English company, English school, and stay in the apartment and stay here for a year, and then go home and leave the apartment a mess and just leave a whole heap of bad ripples in their wake and just go home, because they know there's a pretty good chance they'll never come here again, and they just don't care, and those sort of people, there's not much we can do about that. But the reason I've made all the how-to videos, and the reason I'm talking about this right now, is I know there are some people who care, and that's what the how-to videos are all about, is that I know myself that the mistakes I've made over the years and continue to make have quite often been just because I didn't know better, that nobody had told me. And Japanese people will let you make big mistakes and say nothing, because their thinking is that it's impolite for them to tell you if you're doing something that's not good and causing a bad vibe, that usually they won't say anything, because they think that by saying something to you, that's going to create more of a bad vibe. So they'll just stay quiet and smile at you nicely. And over the years on our how-to videos, I've often had people comment where I've said, the tattoo one was an example. I made a video about the tattoos and said, listen, tattoos are great, but in Japan they still have amongst a lot of Japanese people, not all, but amongst a lot of Japanese people, they can create a negative ripple, right, that make them uncomfortable. So it's better, if you can, to cover them up, you know, and it makes less ripples. And of course, got the usual comments, I'm not Japanese, I don't care, rah, rah, rah. And then I also got comments on that video that said, it's not true. When I was in Japan, I walked around with my tattoos out all the time and nobody said anything, right? And a lot of people that come to Japan and behave badly don't think their behaviour was a problem because nobody said anything, right? And in their country, if they behave badly, someone's going to say, hey, cut that out, you know, that's no good. Whereas in Japan, there's a pretty good chance they won't. Pretty good chance you can get on the train here and talk really loudly on your phone on the train and piss off everybody in the carriage and not one of them will say anything to you. There's a very good chance. Someone might, but there's a pretty good chance that nobody will. And that's what happens. And we've seen that on those how-to videos over the years. Whereas I'll say, look, it's best not to do this thing in Japan. And someone will say, oh, that's not true. I came to Japan, I had my tattoos out all over the place. Nobody said anything. Oh, actually, I remember one guy actually said, it's not true, you know, nobody complained about my tattoos and they all told me how cool they were. Now, it's possible that somebody told him his tattoos were cool and that it was true, they really meant it. But there's also a really, really strong possibility that they were just saying that because that's what they say. You know, that they're just being polite. They who knows what they're really thinking, but they'll say, oh, your tattoos are really cool because that's what they do. It's the same thing that they tell us how great our Japanese is. And some people will believe that too. Oh, they told me my Japanese was really good. Yeah, of course they did. Of course they did. That's what Japanese people do. They'll tell every girl that they're cute. They'll tell every guy that they're cool. They'll tell everybody that their Japanese is really good. And they'll probably tell you their tattoos are cool as well. Doesn't mean that they mean it. And as I've talked about before on those how-to videos, quite often the results of whatever your bad behavior is won't become obvious to you because nobody's going to say it to you straight out that behavior is really bad, you shouldn't do that. That girl that was dancing down the street really loudly, turning heads and, you know, hanging out all over the place, you know, she'd have no idea probably. Nobody would have told her that her behavior was bad. But the results that it has is that it will turn some people off foreigners because they'll go, oh yeah, foreigners, they always behave badly. There's actually been some other stuff like that on TV too, where they've actually interviewed Japanese people and said, what behaviour from foreigners don't you like? And oh well, you know, and they'll be shy at first, and they'll say, oh, you know, talking loudly on the train, you know, and list off the things that they don't like, right? But they won't tell you to your face, so quite often you won't know, you know. So the other effect it can have, of course, is as well as sort of generally affecting other foreigners. I mean, this is the problem, you know. If someone behaves badly, that gives people a negative impression of people who aren't Japanese, and then someone who tries hard comes along and gets treated with the same bigotry that the person who behaved badly does. The other one is that you can have a more direct effect that you're not even aware of. For example, if they know that you behave well, if they know what you like and they know that you behave well, then they might offer you a job. You know, someone says, oh, I need an English teacher, or I need a person to do this job, and if they know that you behave well, they might say, oh, I know a guy, but if they know that you don't behave well, and that if they recommend you, you might turn up and embarrass them, they might not recommend you. Or for another example is a party. If they know that you behave well, and that, you know, they've seen you out socially before and you're very quiet and respectful and polite and aware of other people, then you might get invited to a party. But if they've seen you out being loud and obnoxious and drunk and carrying on and, you know, embarrassing everybody, they won't invite you to a party, right? They'll have a direct effect on you. So it's just, you know, and again, I've talked about this lots of time over the years, and there's always people that arc up, I'm not Japanese, I'm going to behave wherever I like, I don't care. To those people, that's great, you can do that, no problem at all. These videos aren't for you, right? These videos are for the people who want to come here and not make ripples and and also have the best experience. I'm convinced, what I've seen over the years, I've seen both kinds. I've seen people who come here and just try to blend in quietly and not rock the boat, and those people tend to have a much better experience here, whether it be just a short time or a long term. They tend to have a better experience. As a result of their behaviour, they tend to have more opportunities and better experience. The people who come here and don't give a rat's about anybody else and just behave however they want, and I'm not Japanese, I want to do my own thing, they tend to not have such a good experience. I've seen this before. And dramas, those sort of characters tend to have one drama after another. And I know there's a guy that's coming to mind as I'm saying this that used to tell me about all these dramas. He always seemed to be having some drama, and you know, he actually did Aikido too in another dojo far away, and you know, he had dramas with people in the dojo. I've never had a drama with anyone in a dojo in a couple of decades of going to Japanese dojo. I've never had a drama with anybody, but he seemed to have one drama after another. Just people through his work just seemed to have just one drama after another, and I think it was just his style. It was just this sort of a confrontational, just didn't want to go with the flow and didn't want to sort of, you know, you've got to know when to keep your mouth closed here. You know, I made a video a long time ago called Look, Listen and Learn, and it's really important. You know, that's what Japanese people do. They look and they listen and they learn, and modify their behavior accordingly, you know, whereas usually, not always, you know, which is an important skill. And I think my friend there just didn't do that. He just did whatever he wanted, and he just seemed to have one confrontation and one drama after another, and his life here wasn't as good as it could have been, I'm sure, you know. So anyway, so you know, what can we do about all this talk about foreigners in Japan and the bigotry that's starting to come up? Stronger, it's getting stronger. It's always been here, but it's starting to get stronger, and all this other stuff. I mean, what can we do about it? That's my thinking. So what we can do is only what we can do ourselves in our own behaviour, and my thinking is that if we behave as well as we can, that will have a positive effect, and it will help. You know, that's the way to go. So, but again, we've all got a choice how we behave, haven't we? We've all got a choice how we behave, and we all get the consequences of our actions. So anyway, hopefully one person, I always think with these videos, if it helps one person to have a better experience or to understand something a little bit better, then it was worth making the video. So hopefully there's one person that benefited from this. If so, that made it worthwhile. Anyway, there was that. More videos coming soon.